Thanks for taking the time to join us again today for March's House and Hive session. And good morning and welcome to the webinar as well. We do have a number of guest speakers and sort of panelists, I suppose, today as well to introduce you all to and for different perspectives on this particular topic. But we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, we'll make a start. So as I say, morning everyone, and welcome to the March House and Hive session. Thanks for joining us. So today, and I suppose for all of the House and Hive webinars, we always try and select a topic which is sort of a bit of a discussion point across the sector at that time. And seemingly at the moment, it's repairs is obviously always has been a sort of a big talking point, but I think it's quite timely at the moment. So we're going to be covering state of repairs in the social housing sector, and I guess not just from a service delivery perspective or point of view, but more from a sort of discussing financial, regulatory, strategic perspective as well. So I'll come on to the sort of context as to why shortly, but just a very, very brief introduction to myself and I'm Prodo. If you're new to us, I'm Jacob. I've been with Prodo and sort of hosting this session for the last few years, every month. And yeah, our sort of remit in the social housing space is a digital transformation consultancy, but also digital products solutions provider as well. So we've worked with hundreds of HAs throughout the time of 25 plus years and seen the sector evolve and change very much in terms of how digital can be utilised to sort of alleviate some challenges across the space, which is obviously still an evolving picture today. So that's us, that's kind of where we fit in. But onto the topic for today then, which we know repairs has always been a top priority for customers. It's one of the most tangible ways which they experience the sort of the social housing service. But we, based on data and some of the things we're hearing in this space and some other publications and research, we're hearing a bit of a shift again on this sort of topic. So some of you, or most of you, probably saw Inside Housing's latest repairs tracker report, which was talking through the fact that across the past financial year, there's been over £8.8 billion spent on repairs and maintenance, which is actually a £1 billion higher than the year before. And it's projected to hit over 50 over the next 5 years, and I think the sort of the reason for that is there's a few things that feed into it, isn't there? But I think there's pressure coming from various angles across the space. We know that housing associations and you guys are being pulled in various different directions, and that's sort of a changing picture as well. We know that repairs are quite a big driver of potentially underperforming scores in the TSMs. You know, that's quite a sort of significant driver of complaints as well. And obviously in October, Awaab's law will be coming into play, which will be sort of legally binding timeframes around things like the damp and mould issues that sort of led to that. But I don't think spend is the full story or not the only element of this. And it's also not just because, you know, the increase in the spend, I don't think is just because it's more's being done. It's also costing more to do these sorts of things when you consider materials, labour, having to adapt to compliance and things. And I think for quite a few associations across the country, it's putting financial resilience to the test in some ways. Did a little bit of research prior to this, and obviously is, I suppose, quite widely known as well that I think for the first time since 2008, the sector's interest cover ratio across the board has fallen below 100%. So the surpluses after covering the major repairs works aren't sufficient to meet interest payments on borrowing, which is obviously expensive in itself. And whilst the sort of the rent caps, which were obviously a temporary measure in 23-24 have ended now, I think many are still kind of feeling the effect of that sort of limited revenue growth at the same time that those costs were sort of climbing as well. So yeah, I suppose today's conversation isn't just about the sort of the demand or the regulation around it, but I think what we're hearing is it's quite often a trade-off in terms of where that spending needs to go, and that's obviously something which changes over time. But I suppose with an eye on sustainability and what's possibly getting lost when compliance and responsive repairs and urgent jobs sort of dominate that spend, and I guess how can we as a sector regain a bit of more of a grip on that? So obviously we've got our own sort of views and perspectives from our client base and sort of people we discuss this with in the sector, but we have brought along three panelists, which we're very glad to have with us today. So we have Leon Storer from ARC and a background of asset management directorship at Stonewater, John, Chief Exec at Prima Group, and also Paul, Chief Exec at Durham Age Miners Workers, mine work as apologies there, Paul. So yeah, there's quite a lot to dig into there, but I thought now would be a good time to introduce you guys. If we could start with yourself, please, Paul, if that's okay. Just a brief intro.
Yes, I'm Chief Executive Durham My Workers Homes, which is a small housing association in the northeast of England, based in the Chesley Street area, but work across the Durham coalfield. So we stretch from the Pennines to the coast, and then from the middle of Northumberland down to Hartlepool into the operating area, although most is concentrated in County Durham. We've been around 127 years this year. We were founded a long time ago. We're the largest almshouse charity in the UK, probably the world, as far as we can tell. It's quite a slightly niche form of social housing, but one that's been around since before William the Conqueror in terms of concept. But in terms of products, we're as new as anybody else. We've been developing, well, I've been working here 22 years, and we've been developing all that time since before then. I've personally been in the housing industry since the mid-90s. 1995, so that's 30 years this year. As I've seen various regulatory regimes come and go, various economic circumstances come and go, and we're still here, and we're still moving forward. We have 1,800 stock. That's the kind of size we are. So we're we used to say we were half the average size of a housing association. We're probably less than now because there's mergers and mergers and mergers. But we're large enough to get regulated fully, and so that's who we are.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks for that, Paul. Thanks for your time today as well. Over to you, John.
Right. Good morning, everyone. John Gader from Prima Housing Group. So we are, I think we're classed as a medium-sized house association, but feel a bit smaller than that. So operate mainly across the Liverpool City region, just under 3,000 homes. We're not as old as Paul's association, but we were one of the traditional housing associations that was set up in the cities as peer-head housing associations. So some people might know us as that old name. And then in 2017, we merged with Leasehold Community Homes, which was a traditional stock transfer from Wirral Borough Council. Like I say, we operate across the Liverpool City region, but predominantly Wirral, Sefton and Liverpool. We've been developing for quite some time and continue to develop. What else could I say? The difference between Leasehold and Peerhead is that Peerhead owned quite a lot of the old traditional pre-1919 stock, so terraced houses in areas of deprivation, which is more of a challenge than the stock transfer on Leasehold, which is more concentrated and slightly newer. So it comes with its challenges. I've been in the game since started off as a YTS in 1981, so long time ago. Housing background, but worked for the regulator, worked for the Order Commission, worked for local authorities, now back into housing associations.
Thanks for that, John. And just leave yourself, Leon.
Thanks, Jake. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all here today. Leon Storer from ARC Consultancy. Been in the sector, I think, probably as long as Paul and John. I think I'm nudging just over 35 years. So I started at an apprentice level, worked my way up through the ranks, predominantly always working in construction, asset management, and compliance. So working my way up through the ranks, predominantly on the social housing side, but I did jump ship for a little while, worked on the dark side, as I called it, with the contracting, which was good, actually. It really sharpened some of the edges a little bit more. But game was always to come back to client side and bring that knowledge back. And hence, I think moving to our consultancy just over a year ago, and then really that was a move to sort of bring a big kit bag of experience and knowledge to the table, just to help organisations with their strategic asset management issues, decarbonisation and net zero. So and it's a big area that ARC work on now nationally across across the sector, and so predominantly with social landlords, councils, and also developers as well.
Perfect, great stuff. Thanks for those intros, guys, and yeah, once again, thanks for joining us as well today. Yeah, we'll get into the questions, and if anyone does have any questions for any of the guys, please feel free to add those into the chat, and we can look to field those between us as well. But yeah, I suppose going back to that sort of point I made in the intro, guys, that report from that sort of repairs tracker from Inside Housing is kind of reporting that record spend that we've not really seen before by some margin as well when you compare it to previous years and particularly the year before, which feels like quite a jump. But yeah, is it something which I suppose part of it will be due to having to deliver more in terms of increased scrutiny and incoming regulation changes and I suppose expectation of stock condition as well. But how much of it is simply down to sort of rising costs and having to sort of balance that as well? Is it that housing space is getting more for the money, or is it having to spend more just to sort of continue on the same path and maybe tread water in a way? I don't know if come to yourself, Leon, first, in terms of what you're seeing sort of sector wide with your client base that you've worked with, maybe.
Yes, I think with that, Jake, I think it's a bit of a perfect storm for the sector at the moment. And I think if you look back a few years, and people still talk about the COVID issues and people catching up. I think people were catching up pre-COVID at the time. So it sort of just exacerbated the issue with everybody having to shut down for a good couple of years, and just I see undertaking emergency and urgent works then and holding back on planned works, and I think that's starting to filter through now that the planned works haven't caught up. They're struggling. Clients are struggling with decent contractors to undertake the work. They're struggling with resources as well. And as you mentioned there, the addition of additional regulation now with Awaab's law coming into place, they've got decent homes too that's coming down the tracks as well. So not only are they trying to play catch up on plan works, but they've got a lot of issues that have been put on them by the regulator with regards to more urgent operational works and attendance there. So there seems to have been a focus shifted from the planned area, which in our eyes is critical, because really the client should be still pushing forward with the plan works to offset the reactive issues that they've got. But it seems to be a shift of focus onto just dealing with the here and now, just to try and keep those level of complaints down, trying to compete with tenant satisfaction measures. So there's been a bit of a shift change over to responsive works, which are obviously quite expensive to undertake and continue to do. So I think, yeah, that's the area that's tackled, and hence why there's been a sudden increase of over £1 billion in responsive works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, is that sort of your view on this, I suppose? Come to yourself first, John.
It does, and we have seen a spike in repairs, but can I be a little bit controversial? Because I don't think this has just happened. I think the repairs just don't materialise. I think it's probably symptomatic of, you touched on the rent caps, you touched on, lack of investment over the years, and I think it's just caught up with us in that. I think a lot of investment went in new supply. We were sort of steering our own ship, so the standards were minimum standards, I think. So investments in existing homes were down to boards and organisations, and probably not enough sort of focus was given on existing homes. So I think it's just caught up with us. The other thing is customer expectations. So Leon mentioned about the 60-40. When I was at the Audit Commission, that was one of the KPIs that we assessed people on. So 60, what are your plans to get 60% planned and all that? People aren't just waiting for that. And also we've got Awaab's law coming in. You've got other regulation, customer expectations has increased. I don't think people, so if you say we want to sort of batch these repairs, non-urgent stuff and all that, you try to selling that to customers. They want it like yesterday. So yeah. I think it's a really difficult situation, and I do think it's just it's a multitude of things. So you mentioned the economy, contractors going bust, supply and demand. COVID didn't help, so people are still playing catch up, and it is that perfect storm that Leon has alluded to. So I think it's all just caught up with us, and we're trying to work through that. The other thing I would say is probably we don't know or didn't know our homes and our customers as much as we thought we did. So the stock condition stuff, all the data driven decisions that we were making, I think that was a big gap.
Yeah, I think that in particular is something we hear quite a lot from our side as well, to be honest, in terms of, yes, we know we need to make data-driven decisions in these areas, part of it being sort of customer segmentation based on a few different things. Yeah, you're right in terms of stock condition data as well. Is that something that, what's your view on that, Paul, from your sort of perspective of Durham Age mine workers?
I mean, we're quite small, and there are swings and roundabouts about being small compared to, say, medium or large, and that is we haven't grown by acquisition. We've grown organically, so we know we built all of our own stock. So the people in this building, quite literally, well, not bricks and mortar, but overseeing the process. And so we know what we've built, and we know where it is, and even the stuff that's 100 years old, we've had it for 100 years, so we know it very well. So we thought we knew our stuff very well, and genuinely we did, perhaps compared to many. But even so, when you really have gone through the full stock condition survey, you're making sure all your data's up to scratch, not more than 5 years old, and you've done really in-depth tenant satisfaction measures. I mean, we thought we were on top of that. We'd had a big PIP spike a couple of years ago when with all the publicity arose, and we were doing a big push, and there was a huge volume of work putting right damp issues, some of which were important, some of which were everyone who just spotted a couple of spots of pin mold suddenly thought they were going to die. So, you had to manage those kind of expectations and work, create the proper workflow. But even though we thought we got every significant property that had some damp issue in it identified and a plan of work, and we're on top of it. And then we did the TSMs this year, and some like 30 people said, "Oh, we've got damp, and no one's doing anything about it." It's like, where have you been?
Yeah.
So however, that 30 is not a big deal, but it was the fact that we had any was just like, what? And we've invested so much into addressing what, and we thought we were on top of it. The big issue, perhaps I see it, again, we're all facing the same kinds of issue, and it's perhaps the mix of the problems that differs from one organization to another, depending on its history, depending on its size, depending on the appetite for development and how much risk boards have put into that kind of side of things. But I think what impacts a smaller organization is the speed of change, trying to keep on top of things when you've got a small executive team and everybody's actually got multiple hats, because in a small organization you've not got the volume of work to have lots and lots of specialists. So individuals do quite a wider range. So keeping on top of all of the changes across all your responsibilities that's the thing that's a difficult thing for an organization like ours, making sure we know what is expected of us and are briefed properly. And once we know, being small is an advantage, and you can be a little bit more nimble. You can, you haven't got as big a problem to address. Damp is only a few hundred problems. Property's not tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So you can mobilize resources quickly, but just understanding what do these regulations mean? What is out there? So what does the brief have to change to when we engage with contractors? That's where the challenge is for us. We're up for it. We try for it, but that's where perhaps we face more of a challenge than some other organisations, I would say.
Yeah, got you. That makes total sense, and it's interesting. You mentioned TSMs there, and by the sounds of it, that kind of revealed some areas which I suppose is one of the reasons for it being there, I guess, isn't it? And I know that these regulatory changes always come from a good place, don't they, in terms of the reason they're put in place, and I suppose rightly so when some of them are attached to tragedies like Grenfell or Awaab in Rochdale. But I think the question is, for me, when the regulation landscape's constantly evolving all the time, and therefore you have to place some focus on it because that's what you're sort of regulated and measured on. What does that, as sort of leaders of the organisations, what does that sort of prevent you from doing? Does that squeeze certain areas where you maybe want to focus some time and sort of investment elsewhere, or do you find that these regulation changes always end up sort of forming part of what was part of the strategy anyways? I don't know if any of you got a bit of a view on that in terms of a bit of a paradox of regulation.
Well, I can start on that. In terms of TSMs, we've been collecting satisfaction and other surveys for a long time. I think there's just a focus now through, obviously, the tragedy of Grenfell and Awaab Ishak. So, it's set dead in stone. It's just the can opener, those TSMs, and it's all the things that we should be doing anyway. But I think they just need unpicking a little bit. So the regulator will look at the TSMs, but they'll triangulate. So they'll see what's coming out from other areas, and is it telling them a story? And that's, I think, how we in Prima approach the TSMs. Because, one example is we scored quite low on people feeling safe in their homes, and yet when we did a bit of digging, it was the environment, it was the outside that you can't really influence, or you work with others to collaborate. Could be antisocial behaviour, could be other things going on. We thought it was like, oh, do you mean like you don't feel safe within your home? So we've got issues around damp, mold, and condensation, other stuff like that. So I think you just need to tread carefully with the TSMs. It is, it's obviously telling you something, but it needs unpicking. So it's a can opener for us. Has it actually changed the way we make decisions? I'm not sure. I think what it has done, it's sort of given that spotlight on, are we doing the right things in the right way, in the right place? And so we've looked at, how we deliver our services, how we can reset our relationship with customers, how we communicate and all of that. So it's just given us food for thought rather than stopping us from doing things. But obviously it does help in terms of prioritising some of our investment decisions as well.
I suppose the question is always, is it worth it? The new TSM environment, is the extra information you're getting out of it, which it is extra information, and it's either confirming what you think you know or bringing up something that you missed, which either is valuable, but is it worth the value that you've cost you? So it's costing us now, the TSMs, it cost us 10 grand to do last year's TSMs. Fortunately, the size we are, we only have to do one survey a year. That's adequate. We don't do it every month or something like that. So that was the figure. So over 3 years, that's £30,000. Whereas previously, under the old STAR survey that we used to do with another organisation, no names of factual, it was what we used to go out and do cost us under 4 every 3 years. So you multiplied the cost of that information by 7 times, something like that.
Yeah.
Do you get 7 times better information? I personally don't think we as an organisation do get 7 times better. We get better information, but it's not 7 times better.
Yeah.
And for 30 grand, well, we could have employed some, that's hours of staff time actually fixing problems rather than just investigating information.
Yeah.
Swings and roundabouts. I mean, I think over time things will settle. It's always worse, as I say, for what I just mentioned in your first year. It's always just trying to work out what the heck this means, what is important, what the regulators, their angle on it, and that's always evolving as they see data coming through. So these first couple of years, when if things are settling in, and how do we handle it, and everyone's a little bit edgy because we might get dinged by the regulator at some point. It's a bit scary and worrisome, and because if you make the wrong call, if you don't quite, you miss something, or you've put your resources in, you've placed the wrong bet on where you should put your limited financial resources, and then the regulator does an inspection and says, "Oh, you missed it." Everyone's scared stiff of that. So how do you handle that sensibly and maturely and as a responsible organisation? I mean, again, no names to a practical. I'm aware of another organisation that just recently got inspected, and there was a challenge to the board. The board had rashly and sensibly moved resources from completing their stock condition survey to actually solving some of the identified damp and mould, which meant that the stock condition survey wasn't going to be 100% within 5 years by the deadline of the end of March. And that was an active, knowing they'd pushed it on for a short period and move that resource in. Look, we've got all these damp and mold things that are more than we'd expected. We just need to get them sorted and move the staff around across accordingly. And that was a very sensible, appropriate decision by the board, measured, risk-based, all the rest of it. And the regulator did challenged them for that. They still kept a decent C rating, but it was like, no, it's a red line. Absolutely, you must have this bureaucratic thing of a figure of 100% completion by 31st of March, or we will criticize you.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, is that who's running the organization? Who's responsible for the decisions? So just handling that process, is it the government or the regulator, or is it the board? Where does they'll all settle down, it'll all come out in the wash, but you just worry, have we made the right decision? Can I sleep at night? And that was not the biggest decision, but it can be over more serious decisions. But that's where it just feels a little bit out of kilter at the minute. And I'm hoping, by the time we've all had an inspection under the new regime, TSMs have settled in for a couple of years. You all know what is the key information from our set of TSMs. It'll settle that. But it's that the perfect storm thing on top of Awaab's law coming in, and you've got really tight deadline. I mean, I worry with Awaab's law, you've got your 14 days to get your report out, all that kind of thing. Well, if your piece of damp or your potential serious health and safety hazard is actually relatively trivial, so it's a damp problem, but it's not life-threatening pin mold, damp black mold, it's something else, but you're expected to do your report. Well, that's putting resources into something actually for the business and for the resident isn't that serious, but you've got to still do it. Whereas it would be better spending that resource on your really serious problems, but you may no longer have it available to do that. So because you've spent it on the relatively less important things that the regulators say you must do. So I'm hoping those will settle out as well. But while they're all happening, it's all a bit...
Really interesting point, that, isn't it? Yeah, in terms of... Because it falls into that bracket and under that particular piece of regulation, you might have to, you will have to prioritise those over maybe certain things which, in theory, you would have thought you'd deem higher priority, but just not falling within that sort of category. Which and you're right. I suppose the fear is that the quite public reviews of performance which don't sort of match with what the regulator's looking for, and then everyone sort of knows about it, and that impacts everything, doesn't, and sort of starts to snowball, doesn't it? Which is another sort of battle, I guess. But what's your view on that particular element, Leon, from your perspective of working with quite a few at once when we're sort of discussing how TSM's going to fall into this as well?
Yeah, exactly what John said. We call it the can opener, as it is, because it's the window into the stats for the regulator, just to see what's happening across the wider perspective. And I was just looking at some of the 23-24 perception surveys, and like the average repair satisfaction's down at 66.4%. So that's going to be a key area that they're going to be looking at. For the first time, overall satisfaction has dropped below 70%. So the regulator is not going to be particularly happy. And I think, if anything, the thumb screws are going to get a little bit tighter. So what I'd say to organisations, and when we sort of get invited in to help people out, is just to use the TSMs aren't the be all and end all. It should be part of a triangulation of areas that you should be looking at, because the TSMs are sort of the perception surveys. But you also need to combine that with your transactional ones on a repair by repair basis, but also bring in your complaints as well and triangulate those three areas, because they should overlay and be able to point you in the areas where you're failing. So I think as a takeaway point for people, just don't take it as TSMs in its isolation. Look at the bigger picture. To say that the stats aren't looking particularly good at the moment. And another area that we sort of get asked about is obviously the annual survey. And I know it's a bit more difficult, excuse me, for those smaller organisations with limited resources, but where you can, you should start to look at doing at least a quarterly review, because then you've got a chance before the end of the year, if you've got stats that are coming in particularly bad, you've got a chance then to target those areas where the percentages are falling down and actually start to put in an action plan, so you can prove that at the end of the year to the regulator that you've you've recognised you got particular areas that you're falling down on, but you've done the transactional surveys, you cross-reference with complaints, but then you've built in an action plan to try and alleviate that before the end of year. So, rather than leaving it to that very end point, because then it's too late. You've got to look back and do a reflective piece of work rather than being a proactive piece of work.
Yeah, it exactly that, isn't it? It helps with that sort of proactive approach in that case. And it kind of goes back to that point you mentioned earlier and even before the call before about that sort of data-driven decision-making piece. It does need to all sort of fit together quite nicely, doesn't it, to be able to sort of formulate those insights and know what to do next with that action plan, I guess, which I know quite a lot of HAs struggle with because there's pieces of customer data in various different systems and find it quite difficult to sort of connect up, which is quite a common thing, I think. But no, really good points. Thanks for that. Thanks for those guys. One question which did crop up when we were sort of speaking to people about putting this session on, and I know this is, I suppose, related to possibly organisation by organisation in terms of possible geographic spread or size or internal capability and expertise and things. But when it comes to this record repairs spend, what are your takes on the fact that it feels like some associations are trying to move more repairs to be delivered with in-house capacity and expertise rather than a combination of contractors? And I know contractor management in itself is a problem which many struggle with. I don't know if either of you got a first point on that to sort of cover.
So I don't mind trying to give our sort of view on that. So about a year ago, just under a year ago, we brought our service in-house. It was just an opportunity that actually was presented to us. We were looking at acquiring a contractor, but the existing contractor we were working with was bought out by another RP, and they were focusing on the green agenda. So it gave us a real opportunity to transfer the operatives over to an in-house service. And the reason it wasn't just obviously whatever was happening in the economy, contractors going bust and all that, but also that added social value and be able, we just didn't feel with an external contractor that they're part of the fabric and they're part of your culture, and it's quite difficult to influence that. And obviously with everything else coming our way with the consumer standards and Awaab's law and what happened at Grenfell about sort of how do you actually embed that sort of culture? They're your eyes, they're your ears, safeguarding issues, all of that stuff. So a couple of years ago, we embarked on a big door knock trying to get behind every door, and we found things that were happening that we didn't know about. So high levels of vulnerability, hoarding issues and all of that, where an external contractor just goes in, does the job, comes out, whereas when you've got your own workforce, you can actually train them and hone them to be your eyes and ears on the ground. So we brought that back in-house. It's not been easy, but we talked to a lot of organisations who have done this. We knew it was going to be a cost to the business. Overall costs are thereabouts, but it was going to be quite a slow burn for us. But it was that social value and that customer sort of focus that basically just swayed us to arrive at that decision. And we don't regret making that decision, but it's not easy to do that. So I think we have compared our satisfaction now is improving, and we've had some really good feedback around contractors going into or operatives going into people's houses and that sort of that treating people with respect and all of that. We didn't have that before. And like what Leo mentioned before, we're now able to, we do the TSMs on a monthly basis. So we use the same questions and we do that automatically because the TSMs is a backward look, like Leo mentioned, and people's memories, it'll stick with them if they've had a bad experience, but they could have had another 20 jobs done and they were perfect. But that bad experience will taint what they say about us. So for us, we've looked at that sort of holistic approach, and but the contract, bringing it in-house, it was a big message we were getting back from our customers that the external contractors we were using were basically not as good as they could be.
Okay.
And obviously just to reduce the risks that we had in terms of contractors going bust and mitigating that.
Do you know what impact that exercise had, John, in terms of the sort of cost of facilitating those repairs, moving from contractor to in-house, out of interest?
So, well, it's interesting that so we had 12 months of data from the existing contractor that came over to us. We're averaging unit cost, repair cost of £70 plus VAT. Now, I've spoken to others where it's in the hundreds. So, but we term it internally as wooden dollars. I think trying to get underneath the real value of that with the social value on top, we're really struggling to put a figure on it at the moment. But at the moment, it's £70 plus VAT. In terms of our budget, we increased our budget anyway because we were finding more repairs gone unreported, issues with damp, mould and condensation. So our repair spend has increased anyway. Yeah. But has it cost us more than using an external contractor? No, it's within the same envelope.
Okay, that's interesting. I suppose one of those original questions then for you guys in terms of is the, I know that figure from Inside Housing is obviously sector wide, but is the reason for that increased record spend cost of contractor materials and things, or is it increased sort of repairs program? Sounds like for you guys it's probably the latter in terms of just increasing the budgets and spending more to do more then for you.
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest.
That's interesting.
Jacob, yeah, it's a bit of both. It's increased requests. It's an increase on reports going unrepaired, repairs going unreported, which is a big issue. People saying, "Oh, we didn't want to bother you," and yet there was some real, it could have resulted in major DMC issues under Category 1 under the health and safety rating system. So getting behind every door is key for us, and knowing our homes, knowing our customers. So, and some of it is not property condition related either. And you're not supposed to say, but it is lifestyle.
It's interesting you say that. I was going to ask you all a question on that, which I know we didn't discuss in the prep for this session. I just saw a conversation between a few people on LinkedIn yesterday. I forget who it was, but yeah, they'd been part of a discussion which kind of raised the point you just made in terms of homes are designed and built to a certain standard to alleviate some things such as damp and mould issues caused by ventilation, etc. Obviously, the homes being built every year and some much older than others. So presumably those sort of standards have changed over the years. But how much of it is actually the fact that there is the sort of widespread housing volume problem, and therefore there's maybe more people living in some of these homes than they were originally designed for, and possibly lifestyle things. But when I saw that, I thought it is a good point because it must contribute. But you think, as I suppose it goes into the sort of where do you see the role or the ownership of the HA being involved in this? Is it that the housing association needs to make sure that the property is in the sort of condition which reduces those types of problems as much as possible, and when they know that, then look at the sort of lifestyle as possibly the causing factor? Or I don't know if any of you've got any takes on that. I know you mentioned it yourself to begin with there, John, but
can I just give an example of so we've done quite a bit on wave 1, wave 2 of the SHDF, and we're just about to embark on wave 3. We've actually spent an awful lot of money retrofitting and making properties warmer, but the cost of living has had a major impact. So we're now going back to properties that have only been retrofitted in the last year, so we put smart devices in there, and the smart devices, the data we're getting back is saying that it's dropped below a certain thing or there's moisture. So we've gone back and we've put ventilation systems in there and all the things that you would expect. And people are covering over the ventilation systems, and they're not putting the heating on because they can't afford it. So for us as an association, we're doing all the things we can do on the property, but it's about how do we support people through that cost of living crisis. So it's that, for us, it's that whole systems approach, not seeing things in isolation, taking people with us, supporting them as much as we can. And then is there other multi-agency? So the hoarding issue is a massive issue for us. We've set up a group in Liverpool now, and lots of associations involved that, and we've actually got hoarders telling their story. It's a mental health issue that needs to be addressed. So, and that causes issues with property. So I think, we can't just think about bricks and mortar. It's about people-centered approaches to some of this stuff, and it will be about affordability and other issues, and how you grapple with that is a difficult one, to be honest.
Yeah. We noticed this when all the publicity came out that they were cutting the winter fuel allowance, and 80% of our residents are over 70. So the clue's in the name of the organisation.
Yeah.
So suddenly we had mass. Well, I don't want to patronise people, but there was a lot of worry, and people think, "Oh, I'm going to freeze. I'm going to stop putting my heating on now," and obviously the impact on that on people's well-being and on damp on the property, which is where we first get it in, was actually measurable. And when we looked at the causes of why, condensation suddenly, more so than it had when we looked at it in the previous year when the winter came on. And it was just because people weren't putting their heating on because they thought they weren't going to be able to afford their bills. The reality was actually we had a relatively mild winter, and with the triple lock on pensions and so on, people weren't, the 300 quid allowance didn't really make any difference. And anyone who's on pension credit got it anyway.
Yeah.
So it was an education thing, but that kind of messaging just really impacted on people's lives and the quality of our stock. It was disproportionately, and then that fear factor. It can be turned into real pounds, shillings, and pence at the end of the day. It's and that's out of our control. So you have to sort of anticipate. We saw it was coming. We know our residents. We knew it was going to be an issue. So we engaged in education, and we know where the most vulnerable are, those with financial issues and so on. So we engaged in a education. But you can't catch everybody, and whatever you say, some people won't listen anyway. You just have to plan. Again, because as a small organisation, we don't have resources to have lots of in-house specialists because it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But so we've always had to partner with other organisations that are relevant. So stay-at-home folks and other local charities and local authorities. So those are key, and we've lent hard on them. From our perspective, those are very valuable relationships. I'm sure all organisations do know who's in the network, but you can't waste. You never waste money networking with good. No. That's always a good investment.
Yeah. I mean, the impact it has elsewhere. So, for an example, we've just significantly increased our Helping Hands fund. We've tapped into other foundations that offer, energy and food vouchers. We've tapped in with local food banks and stuff like that. So it is that sort of wider sort of approach that we've taken, collaborating with others who are better placed than us to offer that support, review people's entitlements to benefits and stuff like that. Even if they were in work, they didn't realise that they were entitled to some support. Yeah. So we've done that holistic approach. But it is still really difficult, and people, there is still a cost of living crisis out there, and people are really struggling. And then the other bit is that we always at board, when we're talking about rent increases. So this year it was 1.7 plus 1%, so 2.7. Our costs are around 6-7% annually.
Really, yeah.
So it's outstripping our income that's coming in, but it's that head ruling heart type conversation. But they were really keen, saying, we can't agree a rent increase less than 2.7 because of the cuts that have gone beforehand. But what can we do more of to support our customers? So it's about assessing, knowing the impact on customers as well. So it's all related.
Yeah,
it does all feed together, doesn't it? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, no, okay. Our day-to-day spend's gone up. I noticed just the last management accounts are up 17% on the year on last year. Wow. They were up 20% on the year before, the overall spend. And when we benchmark, our number of repairs per property are pretty much the same as everybody else's. We have somewhat higher unit costs. So, perhaps others aren't so bad, but it's just that the inflation impact is on, and it comes through in all sorts of the materials, in the cost of materials and the cost of labour. And then with the national insurance rises coming in April, it's not going to ease off. So you have to just know where it's coming from.
Just from a wider perspective, Jake, sorry, just quickly I'll quickly zip back to the DLO question that you were talking. Yes, definitely an area that we've been working a lot with organisations with, and quite an increase in. It's not the flavour of the month, but I think it's been gradually building in the background with, as John says, with de-risking the issue of providing a high quality, efficient service. And that's definitely an area to look at if they're bringing an in-house team. But you've got to be careful because it's a lot of capital upfront costs to be done. And you need to have the right team, the right staff in place to manage that organisation going forward. Yes, a great idea, but it does come with a few caveats. And I think, yeah, if an organisation was going to do it, they've got to do it with eyes wide open. So they're not going to just immediately save money. So just a bit of a caveat on that one there, but definitely a way to go, and one that I sort of preach a fair lot about. Just touching on Paul's things, yeah, looking at our benchmarking costs on average across the sector nationally at the moment, £180 is the average repair cost that we're finding working with customers that we've got. Lower quartile average is about 150. Top end people are paying, and this is probably more in the sort of central London areas, around about £234 a repair. Still averaging around about the 3.3 repairs per annum. That hasn't changed much at all, which shows that, yeah, perhaps planned works aren't kicking in as well as they should do, because it has not changed over the past 10 years or so. And then just finally touching that point, that that word that we were all, I suppose, try to remove from our brains about lifestyle. I definitely think, and I get John's point with the decarbonisation. We're doing a lot of work with organisations at the moment on that front, looking at especially just trying to get to EPCC. I think net zero at the moment is a stretch too far for a lot of organisations. I think the key thing at the moment is just to aim for 2030 EPC, and even that's a struggle for some organisations. So I think just bringing in the point that Paul mentioned about, and this is a piece of work that we've been doing with Birmingham City Council, and they won't mind me mentioning their names because it's been a great piece of work that we've been doing with their customer engagement side, because they've had a huge decarbonisation project on. But it is critical that you engage with your customers on that front, and it is down to education, letting them know about the new systems going through, giving them chance to review them, mess with them, play with them, get them at centres so you can have a meet up and get that engagement going. Because just installing retrofit and giving it to the customer and saying, there you go, crack on, it will not work. It will not work, because they've got 20, 30 years of using a gas boiler where they're instantly used to having heat coming through. The new systems that we're putting in now just take a long time to get up to speed, and they need to be run constantly as well. And run constantly in a lot of people's minds, especially customers, equals money.
Equals expensive,
it gets turned off, and then you fall back into the areas that John mentioned where they're starting to get cold spots, they're starting to get damp and mould. And then the question comes up, you've done all this work on net zero, it's not worked. Well, actually, it would work, but had we educated that customer properly? You don't go buy a car, just chuck the keys and said, go have a nice drive. You're actually inducted to the car and told about it, all its features and bits and pieces. We need to do that with the customers as well, and make sure that engagement with retrofit and knowledge and education is part of that installation process.
Sorry, Jake, can I just mention that Leon's just reminded me of something, and it's an exercise we did a while back, and it's something we're going to revisit. And it's around R&M spend. We trawled through 12 months of spend and looked at, I think it was the 3.3 that you mentioned, Leon, where we actually went back and looked at repairs and properties, and we identified the top 100 properties that had, I'd say, a disproportionate number of repairs done, and it actually took up about 20% of our budget. So for us, that then sort of sparked a conversation around, okay, that is just not property condition, do we need to go and understand what's happening in those people's houses? So I think that's a really, really good. It's resource intensive, but it's data. That, it's that sort of 80-20 rule, where 80% of your budget's been taken up by 20% of your customers. And why is that? So it's understanding some of that. And we found that really useful. What we did with it was not a lot, because at the time everything else was happening, but it's something we are going to go back to, because I think you can start throwing money at property condition when you're not really addressing some of the root causes.
Yeah. No, definitely, yeah. I think again, it forms part of what you were saying before about knowing your customer, knowing your stock as well, in terms of being able to sort of make those decisions, I suppose, which is totally agree on.
Data's critical, Jay, absolutely critical these days, and it's an expectation by the regulator as well that you know your customers, but more importantly, you know your stock. And that's a critical area that I think that we work with and we talk to clients about and it's an area that I think a lot of people have sort of pushed to one side. They've been dealing with the here and now too much, but you've really got to start picking up on the knowledge of the assets that you own and manage, and you're not going to manage them properly without the knowledge behind the scenes. So I suppose you could do a whole webinar about data, I think. So perhaps one for another day.
I mean, one of the easy wins is you're correlating your expected needed spend on EPCC with your needed spend on net zero. And if it's looking high in both of them, and you've only got an income stream of something like $5,000 a year from your property, the ones that need a lot of spend in both are your obvious, well, you've got to do something about these and get rid probably and have that really, and that it may not become a financial imperative for 10, 20 years, but actually right now, that is going to be a problem in tech. So why not get rid now and use that? You concentrate on something else. That's an easy, well, not easy, but a simple process relatively.
What would you say? Ignore the fact the camera's going on and off, by the way. I am still here. It's just got a bit of a visual issue coming and going. But from a sustainability point of view, then this might be maybe possibly a big question to finish on that, because I know we're coming to the end here. But we've talked so far in the intro about the report of record repairs spend. You guys, as chief execs, you sort of respective associations, have both kind of alluded to rising costs and rising spend yourselves over the past couple of years, and maybe that outweighing the potential sort of increase of any revenue. At what point, from a sustainability point of view, do you, I'm assuming you're worried right now, but what do we need to do next to sort of help combat some of that? And I know part of this is just touching on repairs and the fact that materials, labour and those things are going up, but regulation expectations are evolving as well. But what can we do next? Is this a sustainable route that this company we're moving forward through, do you think?
It is correlating all your, the point I just raised, if you then correlate, so one of the possible solutions is we've got, I don't know, picking a number over my head, say a couple of hundred properties that are the real issues. Well, if we drop them out of the business plan, well, we're not, because they're going to be a net drain on resources, that frees up resources to then build new. Which you can design to fit modern needs and won't have the EPCC problems and we will potentially be close to net zero, if not at net zero already. So, and a design for an air source heat pump, so you don't have that retrofit problem that Leon was mentioning before. But it's a complex, multivariate problem. If you push this up, then that goes down. Exactly, so trying to keep everything in keep all your plates, but then keep everything in reasonable balance. You never waste money on data. I know I whinged about the cost of the TSMs, and sometimes you can spend, you do look at what are we buying, but generally speaking, the more you know about your stock, and the better, and just, okay, if we lose this, what moves? And the more sophisticated a model as a small organization with limited resources, that is something we focus on. We just bought a new housing management system because the old one just couldn't match our needs anymore. This one's much more flexible, expandable, and it's worth investing in within reason. you can never know too much information, really speaking.
Great points. Thanks
So-
for that, Paul.
I've just got a slightly different sort of approach. We're not in the business of disposing of stock. It especially when you've got a presence in certain areas, it causes all sorts of issues. That said, you can't keep throwing good after bad. It depends on where you're currently at. So as an organisation, financially, what your stock is like, and in terms of what your investment sort of projections are over a period of time. We've always had a balanced approach to investing in our existing homes as well as new developments. And it's about that portfolio. So some of our new developments are higher value in areas that, you get a payback on. And it is a bit like, the rich, sort of covering the poor areas. The other thing is you've got to look at what else you can do. So we're just looking at, we're low geared, financially strong. Half of our stock is unencumbered. We've got a strategy to move to EPC because we know 0 on some of our older stock might not be achievable at all. And the target is 2050 at the moment. So let's get to see whether it's a movement feast, whether things change. But I think financially you can do a bit more. So we're moving to EBITDA, dropping the MRI bit. That gives us a bit more of a cushion. We're looking at refinancing and how we can do things better, efficiencies. I think you've got to put all the ingredients into the pie and look at what that looks like before you start looking at making decisions in certain areas. So we've always had that sort of strategic approach to things, but we are in a better place than some others that, we haven't got a backlog of repairs. We've invested heavily in our existing homes. We're developing new homes, creativity, collaboration, sharing the costs with others, sticking at what you're best at, and then bringing others who are better placed at doing other things that are better than you are. They're at doing, and it's all about that, I think. So it's that whole systems approach for us, and it seems to be working at the moment.
Brilliant. Makes sense. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Any final remarks from yourself as well, Leon?
Yeah, on the sustainability side, I think what we've found with clients is that it's been quite a wake-up call for them when they've done the stock condition surveys, they've done some retrofit assessments. They're getting into that granular detail now of some of the stock that they've finally realising, crikey, we have got to put some funding towards this and obviously chase the grants as well. So it's a key area moving forward. I think I mentioned before, I think the EPCC is the critical area to aim for a lot of organisations. Net zero stretched too far at the moment, but as we sort of work with a lot of clients is try and get the biggest bang for your buck as well. Try and blend some of your capital investment works with your retrofit works as well. So, if you are looking to, put PV on a particular scheme or think, what's the condition of the roof? You may have to bite the bullet and bring it forward in a life cycle renewal by a few years, but do it at the same time, because you're going to save a rock of money on your scaffolding costs. And you're going to get a better product at the end of the day as well. So just try and work a bit smarter, say blending your retrofit sustainably works with your capital investments. That's a key area that we see for clients moving forward.
No, good point. Makes sense. Perfect. Well, I know we've reached 12 o'clock. That flew by. So just wanted to just say very much a big thank you to everyone who joined us today, and a huge thank you to you guys as well, Leon, John, and Paul, for sharing your thoughts and insights so openly. I think what's quite clear from what we've discussed is that it's, like we said at the very beginning, it's not just really the operational challenge around this. It's a bit of the wider lens, which is, I suppose, influenced by financial constraints, regulatory demands, legacy stock conditions, expectations, and all these things all evolving all of the time. And it does feel like it's one of those that, as you've all kind of alluded to, it has to be driven by data, the sort of decisions on next steps, but also what the potential trade-offs are in terms of looking at one place and maybe what what falls down or doesn't fall down, what gets less attention when you sort of focus on that particular area, which is an interesting one. So no, massive thank you very much, guys, for your input. One final point just before we close is that we do have the next webinar scheduled in, which will be Thursday, 24th of April, 11 o'clock. And that one's going to be, I suppose, kind of feeding into what we've discussed today to some extent, which is empowering the sector with data-driven decision-making as well, and sort of how that formulates parts of how we move forwards with these sorts of issues, and not just from a technology point of view, but in terms of systems, skills, culture, and sort of data forming, obviously a big part of that as well. So hopefully we'll see some of you for that next one. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you all again for joining, and in particular the panel speakers as well. Thanks for your input, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Jay.
guys.
Yeah, great
Bye.
to see everybody.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care. Bye.
You're right.
Thank you.